Montana Territory, 1872. Dust swirled across the rutted main street of Cottonwood Springs, a town perched on the edge of civilization where law and chaos battled daily for dominance. The frontier settlement had sprung up like a determined weed, clinging to survival in the shadow of the towering Rockies. It was a place where men came to escape their pasts, forge new futures, or sometimes just disappear altogether. Wade Harrington believed the frontier was no place for tenderness. At 25, he'd already seen enough death and betrayal to last several lifetimes. His lean, muscular frame bore the evidence of years spent breaking horses and driving cattle across unforgiving terrain. Despite the hardness in his hazel eyes, his clean-shaven face retained a youthful handsomeness that caught the attention of many young women in town, not that he noticed or cared. "Another," Wade said, sliding his empty whiskey glass across the scarred surface of the saloon bar. The piano player in the corner hammered out a tinny version of "Oh, Susanna," while card games and conversations hummed around him. Bert, the barkeep, refilled the glass with amber liquid. "You're hitting it pretty hard tonight, Wade. Something eating at you." Wade shrugged, unwilling to voice the emptiness that had been gnawing at him lately. 3 years he'd been riding for the Diamond B Ranch, and what did he have to show for it? A few dollars saved, a decent horse, and not a soul in the world who'd miss him if he disappeared tomorrow. That was the cowboy's lot, drifting from season to season, ranch to ranch, always moving, never belonging. "Just thirsty is all," Wade replied, lifting the glass to his lips. The saloon doors swung open, bringing with them a gust of cool evening air and Sheriff Tom Miller, whose weathered face looked grimmer than usual. "Wade," the sheriff nodded, approaching the bar, "thought I might find you here. Got word from Mr. Blackwell. He needs men for an escort job tomorrow. Paying double wages." Wade's interest peaked despite himself. Douglas Blackwell was the wealthiest man in the territory, owner of the Cottonwood Bank and half the businesses in town. "What kind of escort?" "His niece is arriving on the afternoon stage from Boston. He wants reliable men to make sure she gets here safely from the junction." Sheriff Miller lowered his voice. "Word is, the Delaney gang's been spotted in the territory again." Wade frowned. The Delaneys were notorious for robbing stagecoaches and had no qualms about leaving witnesses dead. Just his niece. "That's right. Some city girl coming out to marry young Doc Peterson." Wade nearly choked on his whiskey. Peterson, that arrangement still going through, thought it fell apart months ago. The sheriff shrugged, apparently not. Blackwell's determined to see his niece settled with the good doctor. Wade shook his head. He'd never understood arranged marriages, city folk treating their daughters like property to be bartered. Though he supposed a comfortable life with the town's only physician was better than most women could hope for on the frontier. "So," Sheriff Miller pressed, "you in or not? Blackwell asked for you specifically." Wade drained his glass, considering. The extra money would pad his meager savings, inching him closer to having enough for a small spread of his own someday. And it was just a simple escort job: meet the stage at Elk Creek Junction, 40 miles east, and bring the lady safely to Cottonwood Springs. "I'll do it," Wade said finally. "Who else is riding?" "Just you and Hank Davis. Blackwell doesn't want to draw attention." Wade nodded. Hank was solid in a fight, and their small number might avoid attracting unwanted notice from the Delaney gang. "We'll head out at first light." As the sheriff departed, Wade ordered one last whiskey, mulling over the job ahead. An Eastern lady coming west to marry a man she'd likely never met. He couldn't imagine subjecting himself to such an arrangement. But then again, love had no place in his world anyway. Love made men weak, vulnerable. Out here, that was a luxury no one could afford, least of all a cowboy with nothing but dust in his pockets and miles of open country calling his name. Katherine Clarke clutched her leather-bound journal tightly as the stagecoach lurched over yet another rut in the crude excuse for a road. At 20 years old, she'd left behind everything familiar: her friends, her beloved books, the Boston townhouse she'd called home. All because of Uncle Douglas's insistence that she would find security in this savage wilderness by marrying his associate. "We'll be arriving at Elk Creek Junction within the hour, miss," the driver called down, his voice barely audible over the rumble of wheels and the jangling harnesses. Katherine attempted to smile in acknowledgement, though her face felt stiff from hours of dust and anxiety. Her rich brown hair, once neatly pinned beneath a fashionable bonnet, now tumbled in loose tendrils around her heart-shaped face. Her traveling dress of robin's egg blue, once crisp and elegant, was crumpled and stained from 5 days of hard travel. The stagecoach carried only one other passenger, Mrs. Eleanor Whitcomb, a minister's widow traveling to Helena to live with her son. The older woman had been kind, offering Katherine peppermints and motherly advice throughout their journey. "You look pale, dear," Mrs. Whitcomb observed. "Are you feeling unwell?" Katherine shook her head. "Just nervous, I suppose. I've never met my intended husband." The widow patted Katherine's gloved hand sympathetically. "Arranged marriages can work out wonderfully. My own parents barely knew each other before their wedding day, and they shared 40 happy years together." Katherine nodded politely, though she remained unconvinced. Until 3 months ago, she'd been engaged to Edward Pembroke, the son of her father's business partner. Then father's investments had collapsed, and within weeks he was dead. Whether from the bullet he'd put through his head or the shame of financial ruin, Katherine couldn't say. Edward had promptly dissolved their engagement, and Uncle Douglas had swooped in with his solution: ship his newly impoverished niece west to marry Dr. James Peterson. A respectable position, Uncle Douglas had written. "As the physician's wife, you'll want for nothing and bring much-needed refinement to our growing community." What Uncle Douglas failed to understand was that Katherine had never cared about wealth or status. Before everything fell apart, she'd been secretly applying to women's colleges, dreaming of becoming a teacher, a path now closed to her. The stagecoach suddenly slowed, then stopped. "Why are we halting, Mrs.?" Whitcomb whispered, her voice tinged with alarm. Before Katherine could respond, the driver's voice called down, "Fallen tree across the road, ladies. Shouldn't take long to clear." Katherine leaned toward the window, peering out at the vast, unfamiliar landscape. Dense pine forest crowded the narrow road on both sides, and mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the June warmth. It was beautiful but terrifying in its wildness, so different from the ordered gardens and brick-lined streets of Boston. The driver and his assistant had climbed down and were examining the obstacle. Katherine watched as they conversed, gesturing at the massive pine trunk blocking their path. A movement in the trees caught her eye, a flash of color, gone almost before she registered it. Then another, her heart began to pound. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Katherine whispered urgently, "I believe someone's in the woods." Before the older woman could respond, 3 riders burst from the tree line, bandanas pulled up over their faces, rifles leveled at the driver and his assistant. "Hands high, gentlemen," one of the masked men shouted. "This here's a robbery." Katherine froze, terror clutching at her throat as she realized they'd fallen into the clutches of road agents. The very outlaws her uncle had warned might be operating in the territory. "Stay inside and keep quiet," Mrs. Whitcomb hissed, her formerly pleasant face now set in grim determination. With surprising agility for her age, she reached into her handbag and extracted a small Derringer pistol. Katherine's eyes widened. "Mrs. Whitcomb, 5 years in Montana Territory has taught me never to travel unprepared," the widow replied tightly. "Now hush." Outside, the leader of the bandits had dismounted and was approaching the coach door, his spurs jingling with each step. Katherine pressed herself against the leather seat, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. The door wrenched open, revealing a tall man with cold eyes visible above his bandana. "Well, well. What have we here?" His gaze traveled from Mrs. Whitcomb to Katherine, lingering on her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Step out, ladies, nice and easy." Mrs. Whitcomb raised her Derringer. "I think not, sir." The outlaw's eyes widened momentarily before he laughed. "That little pea-shooter ain't going to help you none, Grandma." He reached for the door frame to steady himself as he prepared to climb inside. The crack of a rifle shot split the air. The bandit jerked his head around toward the sound, then scrambled backward, shouting to his companions. Riders coming, take cover. Katherine peered past him to see two horsemen charging down the road toward them, rifles raised. The bandits scattered, diving for their horses and the protection of the trees, returning fire as they retreated. Mrs. Whitcomb grabbed Katherine's arm. "Get down, child," she ordered, pulling her to the floor of the coach as bullets whizzed overhead. The firefight was brief but intense. When it fell silent, Katherine cautiously raised her head. Through the window she could see one of the bandits sprawled motionless in the road, while hoofbeats indicated the others were fleeing into the forest. A deep voice called out, "Driver! You folks all right in there?" "We're shaken but unhurt," the driver responded. "Ladies, you can come out now, it's safe." Mrs. Whitcomb tucked her derringer away and straightened her bonnet. "Come along, Katherine. Let's thank our rescuers." On unsteady legs, Katherine followed the older woman out of the stagecoach. Two men on horseback were conversing with the driver, one older with graying hair, the other younger with broad shoulders and a tan Stetson pulled low over his eyes. "Ladies," the older rider said, tipping his hat, "Hank Davis at your service. Mr. Blackwell sent us to escort his niece to Cottonwood Springs." Katherine stepped forward. "I'm Katherine Clarke, Mr. Blackwell's niece. This is Mrs. Whitcomb traveling to Helena." The younger rider dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing his full height, at least 6 feet of lean, muscled cowboy. He removed his hat, revealing thick, dark blonde hair and a face that belonged on a Greek statue rather than the Montana frontier. His eyes, when they met hers, were the color of whiskey held up to sunlight. "Wade Harrington, miss," he said with a slight nod. "Looks like we got here just in time." Something in his appraising gaze, not lecherous like the bandits but coolly assessing, made Katherine's spine stiffen. She was not some helpless creature to be rescued, despite the circumstances suggesting otherwise. "Indeed, Mr. Harrington," she replied with all the Boston frost she could muster, "though I believe Mrs. Whitcomb might have handled matters quite capably with her derringer, had you been delayed." A flicker of surprise crossed the cowboy's face, followed by something that might have been amusement. "I don't doubt it, Miss Clarke. Still, 3 against 1 ain't favorable odds, even for a lady as resourceful as Mrs. Whitcomb appears to be." While Hank helped the driver and his assistant clear the fallen tree, which had clearly been felled deliberately by the bandits, Wade secured the dead outlaw's body to his horse. "That there's Cal Delaney," Hank explained when he noticed Katherine watching. "Youngest of the Delaney brothers. The other 2 got away, but they'll think twice before trying another holdup in these parts." Katherine shuddered, the reality of frontier violence striking home. In Boston, she'd read about Western outlaws in dime novels, finding them excitingly romantic from the safety of her bedroom. The real thing, with real blood staining the dirt road, was anything but romantic. Once the tree was cleared, Wade approached Katherine again. "You'll ride with me from here, Miss Clarke. It's safer that way." Katherine blinked. "I beg your pardon, the stagecoach." "Continues north to Helena," Wade interrupted. "Mrs. Whitcomb's still headed that way, but you're bound for Cottonwood Springs. That's west from the junction." "But my luggage—" "Already being transferred," he said, gesturing to where Hank was securing her trunks to a pack horse. "Mr. Blackwell's orders were clear. We're to bring you directly to him once we reach the junction." Katherine felt a flash of indignation at being handed off like a parcel, but she swallowed it down. This was her new reality, one where her wishes and comfort came second to practicality and men's decisions. She bid a tearful farewell to Mrs. Whitcomb, who pressed a small Bible into her hands. "For strength, dear," the older woman whispered. "The frontier needs brave women even more than it needs strong men, though they don't often admit it." Then Wade was beside her, his tall form blocking the sun. "Ever ridden astride before, Miss Clarke?" Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Certainly not. Ladies ride side saddle in civilized society." A muscle tightened in his jaw. "Well, we're about 40 miles from what you'd call civilized society, and side saddles don't fare well on mountain trails. You'll ride with me." Before she could protest further, his strong hands circled her waist, and he lifted her as easily as if she were a child, depositing her onto his horse. Then he swung up behind her, his chest a solid wall at her back, one arm reaching around her to grasp the reins. "Hold onto the saddle horn," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear, "and try to relax." Jasper can sense tension. Katherine gripped the horn with white-knuckled fingers, acutely aware of the impropriety of their position. Her corseted back pressed against the cowboy's chest, her skirts hiked scandalously high to accommodate the arrangement. If her finishing school headmistress could see her now, she'd surely faint dead away. "Ready?" Wade asked, though he didn't wait for her answer before clicking to the horse. The animal started forward and Katherine gasped, instinctively leaning back against Wade for stability. "That's it," he murmured. "You'll get used to the motion. We'll take it slow until you do." As they set off toward Elk Creek Junction with Hank leading the pack horse behind them, Katherine realized she'd never been so physically close to a man who wasn't a relative. She could feel the steady rhythm of Wade's breathing, smell the leather and pine scent of him, sense the controlled strength in the arm that occasionally brushed against hers as he guided the horse. This wasn't how she'd imagined her arrival in Montana territory, pressed against a stranger, fleeing from outlaws, headed toward a marriage to a man she'd never met. But as the magnificent landscape opened before them, mountains soaring toward the endless blue sky, Katherine felt something unexpected stir within her. Beneath the fear and uncertainty, a small, treacherous thrill of adventure. Wade kept his gaze fixed firmly on the trail ahead, fighting to ignore the distracting warmth of Katherine Clarke pressed against him. He'd expected some prim, fussy creature when Blackwell mentioned his niece, and she certainly had that Boston stiffness about her, but there was something else too. The way she'd stood her ground after the robbery, chin up despite the fear he could see in her eyes. The quick wit in her remarks about the widow's derringer. And now, despite her obvious discomfort at their close proximity, she wasn't complaining about the rough trail or the dust or the heat. Most Eastern women he'd encountered would be weeping or swooning by now. "How much farther to the junction?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the jolting pace. "About 3 miles," Wade answered. "We'll rest there briefly, then push on toward Cottonwood Springs. If we ride steady, we can make it by nightfall." She nodded, and he felt the silky brush of her hair against his chin. The rich brown strands carried a faint scent of lavender, incongruously delicate out here in the wilderness. "And Dr. Peterson, my fiancé, will he be meeting us there?" Her voice caught slightly on the word fiancé, and Wade found himself wondering if the arrangement was as unwelcome to her as it appeared. "Don't rightly know, miss. Your uncle didn't specify." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clip-clop of hooves, the creak of leather, and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Wade could feel the gradual relaxing of her posture as she grew more accustomed to the horse's gait. "Mr. Harrington," she said finally, "may I ask how long you've been in Montana territory?" "Going on 5 years now. Came west after the war." "You fought in the war between the states." Wade nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Union cavalry, enlisted at 17, served 3 years." She was quiet for a moment, processing this. "You must have seen terrible things." It wasn't a question, but Wade answered anyway. "Yes, ma'am, more than any man should." "Is that why you came west, to escape those memories?" Her perception surprised him. Most people didn't look past the surface, didn't try to understand what drove a man to leave everything behind and head into the wilderness. "Partly," he admitted. "Mostly came looking for something that was just mine. A place where a man is judged by what he can do, not where he comes from or who his daddy was." "And have you found it, that place?" Wade considered the question as they crested a small rise, revealing the sprawling valley beyond. The late afternoon sun gilded the landscape, turning the grasslands to flowing gold and the distant mountains to purple shadow. "Still looking," he said finally, "but out here at least there's room to breathe. Room to become whatever a person's meant to be." She turned her head slightly and he caught a glimpse of her profile, delicate nose, full lips, a wisp of hair blowing across her cheek. "That sounds like freedom," she said softly. Something in her tone made Wade wonder what she was running from or what she was running toward, but it wasn't his place to ask. Katherine Clarke was Douglas Blackwell's niece, soon to be the wife of the town doctor. Her life and her choices were nothing to do with him. They reached Elk Creek Junction as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The junction was little more than a trading post, stables, and a small way station where stagecoaches could change horses and passengers could find a meal and a bed if necessary. Wade dismounted first, then reached up to help Katherine down. His hand spanned her narrow waist easily, and for a moment as he lifted her from the saddle, their eyes met. Something electric passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their vastly different backgrounds. Then her feet touched the ground and she stepped quickly away, smoothing her rumpled skirts with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," she said formally, as if rebuilding the proper distance between them. Hank approached, leading the pack horse with Katherine's trunks. "Stage to Helena just pulled out," he reported. "I've arranged for fresh horses. We can be on our way as soon as the lady's ready." Wade nodded. "Miss Clarke should eat something first. It's a long ride to Cottonwood Springs." Inside the way station, the proprietor's wife served them a simple meal of bean soup, corn bread, and coffee. Katherine ate sparingly but with evident hunger, her manners impeccable even in such rustic surroundings. Wade found himself watching her covertly, noting the graceful way she handled her spoon, the delicate arch of her throat as she sipped her coffee. "Tell me about Cottonwood Springs," she requested as they ate. "What sort of place is it?" Hank chuckled. "Growing fast, that's what kind of place. Wasn't much more than a wide spot in the trail 5 years ago. Now we've got a proper street with a dozen businesses, church, school being built. Even got a small theater where traveling shows perform when they come through." "And the people," Katherine pressed, "what are they like?" Wade set down his coffee cup. "All kinds, ranchers, miners, merchants. Mostly decent folk trying to build something lasting. Some rougher elements too, but Sheriff Miller keeps order well enough." "And Dr. Peterson," she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "What can you tell me about him?" Wade and Hank exchanged glances. "Fine doctor," Hank offered finally. "Trained back east somewhere, came out 2 years ago. Keeps to himself mostly, but does his job well." It wasn't much of an endorsement, Wade knew. The truth was, James Peterson was competent enough as a physician, but cold as a mountain stream. At 35, he was significantly older than Katherine, with prematurely graying hair and spectacles that did little to warm his calculating gaze. "He's respected in town," Wade added, feeling he should offer something more positive. "Has a nice house on the north end of Main Street, 2 stories, white picket fence." Katherine nodded, though Wade could see the information provided little comfort. What did it matter if her future husband had a fine house if she knew nothing of his character, his temperament, whether he might be kind or cruel? "We should get moving," Hank said, rising from the table. "Want to reach town before full dark." Outside, Wade discovered that the station keeper had indeed provided fresh horses, including a gentle mare with a side saddle for Katherine. "Thought the lady might be more comfortable this way for the longer journey," the older man explained with a wink. Katherine's face brightened at the sight. "Oh, how thoughtful." Wade helped her mount, noting how naturally she took to the side saddle, her posture immediately transforming into that of an accomplished horsewoman. Another surprise from this Eastern lady. "You ride well," he observed as they set out, Katherine now managing her own mount between Wade and Hank. A genuine smile curved her lips, the first he'd seen from her. "My father insisted I learn. He said a proper education included physical accomplishments as well as intellectual ones." "Wise man," Wade commented, the smile faded. "He was. Until the end." Something in her tone suggested a story there, but Wade didn't press. Everyone out west carried their burdens, their secrets. It was an unspoken code. You didn't ask about a person's past unless they offered it freely. They rode west as the shadows lengthened, following a trail that wound through pine forests and across open meadows bright with wildflowers. Katherine seemed to drink in the scenery, her earlier tension gradually easing as she grew more comfortable with the journey. "It's beautiful," she said during a brief rest to water the horses at a clear mountain stream. "More so than I imagined. The dime novels never captured the vastness of it all." Wade watched her as she stood at the stream's edge, one gloved hand resting on a boulder, her profile outlined against the panorama of mountains and sky. Something twisted in his chest, a warning perhaps that this woman was dangerous to his peace of mind. "Beauty's got teeth out here," he said more gruffly than he intended. "Land that pretty can kill you quick if you don't respect it." She turned to look at him, those expressive eyes suddenly somber. "Is that what the West has taught you, Mr. Harrington? To see danger and beauty?" The question hit closer to home than she could know. Wade busied himself adjusting his saddle cinch to avoid her perceptive gaze. "Taught me to see things as they are, not as I wish them to be. That's survival." When he glanced up again, Katherine was still watching him, a thoughtful expression on her face. Perhaps, but surely there must be room for both beauty and truth. For appreciation alongside caution. Before Wade could formulate a response, Hank called from up the trail, "Riders coming." Wade was instantly alert, one hand moving to the revolver at his hip as he scanned the trail ahead. 3 horsemen approached at a steady trot, not the headlong pace of trouble but not casual either. "Get behind me," Wade told Katherine, relieved when she complied without argument. As the riders drew closer, Wade relaxed slightly. He recognized the lead man as one of Blackwell's ranch hands. The banker himself rode in the center, his portly frame uncomfortable atop a large bay gelding. The third rider was a slender man in a black coat and bowler hat whom Wade identified as James Peterson. "Ah, there you are," Blackwell called as they approached. "We were beginning to worry when you didn't arrive at the junction on schedule." "Ran into some trouble, Mr. Blackwell," Hank reported. "Delaney gang tried to rob the stage. We handled it, but it slowed us some." Blackwell's florid face darkened. "Delaney's, did they?" His gaze fell on Katherine, who had moved her horse forward. "Katherine, my dear, you're unharmed." "I am quite well, Uncle Douglas," she replied, her voice cool but polite. "Thanks to Mr. Harrington and Mr. Davis." The banker nodded brusquely. "Good work, men." He turned to the slender man beside him. "Katherine, may I present Dr. James Peterson, your betrothed?" Peterson urged his horse forward, studying Katherine with clinical detachment. "Miss Clarke, your journey was not too taxing, I hope." There was no warmth in the question, no real concern, just the perfunctory inquiry of a man examining a business transaction. Wade felt a surge of irrational anger on Katherine's behalf. "Nothing I couldn't manage, Dr. Peterson," she answered, her voice even. Wade noticed she didn't offer her hand or any other gesture of greeting to her future husband. An awkward silence fell, broken by Blackwell's forced heartiness. "Well, no sense dawdling on the trail. Cottonwood Springs awaits, and Mrs. Jenkins has prepared a special supper in honor of your arrival, Katherine." As they formed up to continue the journey, Blackwell taking the lead with Peterson, Katherine in the middle, and Wade and Hank bringing up the rear, Wade found himself studying the rigid set of Katherine's shoulders. The joy she displayed earlier while admiring the landscape had vanished, replaced by the stiff formality he'd first observed. And Peterson hadn't once looked back to check on his bride-to-be or attempted further conversation. He rode beside Blackwell, the 2 men conversing in low tones about business matters, as if Katherine's presence was an afterthought. "Poor little lady," Hank murmured, riding close enough that only Wade could hear. "Cold fish like Peterson don't deserve a wife, let alone one with spirit." Wade grunted noncommittally, though he silently agreed. But what business was it of his? Katherine Clarke's future wasn't his concern. She'd be the doctor's wife, living in that fine house with the white picket fence, hosting socials and charity events like proper ladies did. She'd probably be grateful for the security and position, especially coming from a situation dire enough that she'd agree to marry a stranger. Yet as they rode into Cottonwood Springs just as twilight was giving way to true darkness, Wade couldn't shake the image of Katherine standing by the stream, her face alight with wonder at the wild beauty surrounding her. Or the conviction that James Peterson would never appreciate that same wonder, might even seek to extinguish it. Not your concern, he reminded himself sternly as they dismounted in front of Blackwell's imposing two-story home on the edge of town. Not your concern at all. But when Katherine turned to thank him for his escort, her eyes meeting his briefly before she was ushered inside by her uncle, Wade knew with grim certainty that Katherine Clarke had already become very much his concern indeed. Katherine stood perfectly still as Mrs. Jenkins, her uncle's housekeeper, fussed with the drape of her new dress, a confection of pale green silk that had been waiting in the guest room, along with several other ready-made gowns in the latest frontier interpretation of Eastern fashion. "There now, Mrs. Jenkins said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "You look a proper picture. The doctor will be most pleased." Katherine doubted that. In the week since her arrival in Cottonwood Springs, she'd seen Dr. Peterson exactly 3 times, each visit more stilted and uncomfortable than the last. He'd called at Uncle Douglas's house, sat rigidly in the parlor making polite conversation about the weather and local developments, and departed promptly at the end of the prescribed 30 minutes. Not once had he attempted to learn anything meaningful about her interests, her hopes, her opinions on any subject of consequence. Nor had he offered any genuine insight into himself beyond the surface details of his practice. "You'll make a fine match," Uncle Douglas had assured her after the most recent visit. "James is well established, respected. The practice keeps him busy, but he'll provide admirably." Provide? As if material comfort was all a wife might desire from marriage, as if the emptiness in Dr. Peterson's eyes when he looked at her was of no consequence. "The engagement party begins in 20 minutes, Mrs. Jenkins reminded her, adjusting a final pin in Katherine's upswept hair. "The guests will be arriving soon." Tonight, Katherine's engagement to Dr. Peterson would be officially announced to Cottonwood Springs society. Uncle Douglas had invited everyone of consequence: the mayor, the banker, prominent ranchers and merchants, the newspaper editor, even the circuit judge who happened to be in town. The wedding date would be set for precisely 6 weeks hence, giving Katherine just enough time to establish herself in the community before becoming Mrs. James Peterson. The thought made her stomach clench with dread. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins," Katherine said, forcing a smile. "Would you mind terribly if I had a few moments alone before going downstairs?" The housekeeper patted her shoulder sympathetically. "Of course, miss, just don't tarry too long. Your uncle is particular about punctuality." When the door closed behind Mrs. Jenkins, Katherine moved to the window, gazing out at the bustling main street of Cottonwood Springs. The frontier town was more developed than she'd expected. Wooden sidewalks lined the streets, gas lamps cast pools of light at regular intervals, and the buildings, though simple, showed evidence of care and craftsmanship. In the week she'd been here, Katherine had begun to form a tentative attachment to the place. Mrs. Miller, the sheriff's wife, had taken her under her wing, introducing her to the other ladies of the town and showing her the small library housed in the back room of the general store. The schoolteacher, Miss Winters, had invited her to visit the nearly completed schoolhouse and had seemed genuinely interested in Katherine's ideas about education. The people were friendlier than she'd anticipated, less concerned with rigid social structures than with whether a person was honest, hardworking, and willing to contribute to the community. It was refreshing after the suffocating constraints of Boston society, but there had been no sign of Wade Harrington. Katherine told herself this was for the best. The handsome cowboy had featured too prominently in her thoughts already. His quiet competence during the stage robbery, the surprising gentleness of his strong hands as he'd helped her mount and dismount, the flash of something like understanding in those whiskey-colored eyes when she'd spoken of seeking her own path. Such thoughts were dangerous for a betrothed woman, especially one whose marriage represented her only chance at security in this new world. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. "Katherine," Uncle Douglas called, "the guests are arriving." "It's time to come down." Katherine squared her shoulders, smoothed her silk skirts, and moved toward the door. Whatever her private reservations, she would play her part tonight. She would smile and accept congratulations and pretend that marrying James Peterson was the fulfillment of her dearest wish rather than a sentence to a lifetime of polite indifference. She had no other choice. The parlor and dining room of Uncle Douglas's home had been transformed for the occasion. Oil lamps and candles bathed the rooms in golden light. Flowers from Mrs. Jenkins's garden adorned every available surface, and tables laden with refreshments lined the walls. A small ensemble of local musicians played in the corner, a violin, piano, and cello creating a surprisingly sophisticated backdrop to the murmur of conversation. Uncle Douglas steered her through the crowd, making introductions with the air of a man displaying a prized acquisition. Katherine smiled and nodded and said all the right things, though the faces and names began to blur together after the first dozen. Dr. Peterson stood near the fireplace, accepting congratulations with the same detached politeness he'd shown in all their interactions. When Katherine was finally brought to his side, he bowed formally and offered his arm. "You look lovely this evening, Miss Clarke," he said, the words correct but empty of genuine admiration. "Thank you, Dr. Peterson," she replied automatically. "You're too kind." Uncle Douglas beamed at them, oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the lack of warmth between them. "Stand together now, I have an announcement to make." He tapped his glass with a spoon, calling for the room's attention. The music stopped, conversations died away, and all eyes turned toward them. "Friends and neighbors," Uncle Douglas began, his voice booming with satisfaction, "I've invited you here tonight to celebrate a joyous occasion. My niece, Katherine Clarke, recently arrived from Boston, has consented to become the wife of our esteemed doctor, James Peterson." Applause filled the room, along with calls of congratulation. Katherine maintained her smile through sheer force of will, even as Dr. Peterson's hand closed mechanically around hers. "The wedding will take place 6 weeks from today," Uncle Douglas continued, "on August 15th at our newly completed church. I expect to see all of you there to witness this happy union." More applause, and then the musicians struck up a lively waltz. Dr. Peterson turned to Katherine with an expression that might almost have been apologetic. "I believe we're expected to dance," he said quietly. Katherine allowed him to lead her to the center of the parlor, where the furniture had been pushed back to create a small dance floor. His hand at her waist was correct but impersonal, and he maintained the proper distance between their bodies as they began to move to the music. "I understand you've been making acquaintances in town," he said after several silent measures. Katherine nodded. "Mrs. Miller has been very welcoming, as has Miss Winters from the school." "Good, good," he guided her through a turn, his movements precise but mechanical. "You should know, Katherine, may I call you Katherine?" "Of course." "You should know that as my wife, certain behaviors will be expected of you. Standards must be maintained. A doctor's wife is a public figure in a town like this." Katherine felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. "What sort of standards, Doctor Peterson?" His pale eyes regarded her from behind his spectacles. "Propriety, discretion, regular attendance at church, participation in appropriate charitable endeavors. And of course, supervision of our household." "I see," Katherine said, struggling to keep her tone neutral. "And what of my own interests? Reading, education, perhaps involvement with the new school?" Something flickered across his face, displeasure quickly masked. "Within reason, of course. Your primary duties will be to our home and, God willing, our children. I wouldn't want you overtaxing yourself with outside concerns." Before Katherine could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal her dismay, the dance ended. Dr. Peterson escorted her back to the edge of the room, where several ladies waited to offer their congratulations and advice. "You make such a handsome couple," Mrs. Hollister, the banker's wife, gushed. "And the doctor's house is lovely, just the right size for a growing family." "You're so fortunate, dear," added Mrs. Phelps, the mayor's wife. "Eligible men of quality are scarce out here. Most young ladies have to settle for ranchers or shopkeepers." Katherine murmured appropriate responses, though her mind was racing. The walls of her future seemed to be closing in with each passing moment. a life confined to household management and child-rearing, her intellectual curiosities and personal aspirations dismissed as unimportant or inappropriate. "Excuse me, ladies," she said finally, unable to bear another moment of such conversation. "I believe I need a breath of fresh air." She made her way through the crowded rooms to the back door, slipping outside onto the porch that overlooked Uncle Douglas's carefully tended garden. The night air was cool and sweet with the scent of roses, a welcome relief after the stuffiness indoors. Katherine gripped the porch railing, drawing deep breaths as she gazed up at the star-strewn sky, so much brighter and more vast than it had ever appeared in Boston. "Beautiful night." The deep voice startled her. Katherine turned to find Wade Harrington leaning against a post at the far end of the porch, his tall figure half hidden in shadow. "Mr. Harrington," she said, surprised both by his presence and by the leap of her pulse at the sight of him. "I didn't expect to see you here." He stepped forward, and moonlight revealed that he'd traded his trail clothes for a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders surprisingly well. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw freshly shaven, but his eyes held the same intensity she remembered from their journey. "Your uncle invited the whole town," he said with a slight shrug. "Even hired hands like me." "I hadn't seen you inside," Katherine said, then immediately wished she hadn't revealed she'd been looking. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Been here a while, keeping to the edges, not much for fancy parties." "Then what brought you?" The question slipped out before Katherine could consider its propriety. Wade's gaze held hers for a long moment. "Wanted to see if you were settling in all right. After what happened on the trail, well, figured I should make sure." The simple concern in his voice touched Katherine more deeply than all the elaborate congratulations she'd received inside. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Harrington." "Wade," he corrected. "Mr. Harrington was my father." "Wade," she repeated, the informality both thrilling and frightening. "And yes, I'm settling in well enough, thank you." His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he'd caught the hesitation in her voice. "Congratulations on your engagement. Seems like the whole town's talking about it." "Yes, well." Katherine turned back to the railing, unable to maintain the pretense of happiness under his perceptive gaze. "It's quite the match, apparently." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the muted sounds of music and laughter from inside the house. Then Wade moved to stand beside her at the railing, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Can I ask you something, Miss Clarke?" "Katherine," she offered, recklessness overtaking her. If she was going to be trapped in a loveless marriage in 6 weeks' time, she could at least claim this small freedom now. "If I'm to call you Wade, you must call me Katherine." He nodded, a fleeting smile crossing his features. "Katherine, then, is this what you want, this marriage to Peterson?" The directness of the question stole her breath. No one, not Uncle Douglas, not any of the well-meaning ladies of Cottonwood Springs, had bothered to ask her that. "It's what's best," she said finally, the practiced answer falling from her lips. "That's not what I asked." Katherine turned to look at him, finding no judgment in his steady gaze, only genuine interest in her answer. Something crumbled inside her, the careful wall of propriety and resignation she'd been building since her father's death. "No," she whispered, "it's not what I want, but my father left me with nothing but debts when he died. I have no other family besides Uncle Douglas, no skills that would allow me to support myself. Dr. Peterson offers security, respectability. At the cost of your happiness." It wasn't a question, and Katherine didn't treat it as one. "Women rarely have the luxury of choosing happiness over security, Mr. Wade. Especially women in my position." His hands tightened on the railing. "And what would you choose, if security wasn't a concern?" Katherine closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to imagine such freedom. "I'd teach, I think. I've always loved books, learning. I applied to several women's colleges back east before everything changed. Or perhaps I'd write stories, articles about the West for Eastern newspapers." When she opened her eyes again, Wade was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something between admiration and sadness. "You'd be good at those things," he said simply. "Got a way with words that makes a person want to listen." The compliment warmed her. "Thank you, but it hardly matters now." Before Wade could respond, the back door opened, spilling light onto the porch. Dr. Peterson stood in the doorway, his tall, thin figure silhouetted against the brightness within. "Katherine, your uncle is looking for you," he said, his tone suggesting disapproval of her absence. His gaze shifted to Wade and his voice cooled further. "Harrington." Wade straightened, nodding politely. "Doc." Katherine moved toward the door, her brief moment of honesty already fading into memory. "I was just getting some air, James. Mr. Harrington was kind enough to keep me company." "Doctor." Peterson's mouth tightened, but he said nothing further as Katherine passed him to re-enter the house. She glanced back once to see Wade still standing at the railing, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Then "Doctor." Peterson closed the door firmly, and Wade was lost to her view. "You shouldn't wander off without informing me," Dr. Peterson said as he escorted her back toward the parlor. "And conversations alone with men like Harrington are inappropriate for a woman in your position." Katherine bristled at his proprietary tone. "I needed air, and Mr. Harrington happened to be on the porch. There was nothing improper about our conversation." "Nevertheless," Dr. Peterson insisted, "appearances matter. As my fiancé, you must be above reproach." The possessiveness in his words chafed at Katherine's already frayed nerves. "I wasn't aware that our engagement required me to surrender my ability to speak with whomever I choose." Dr. Peterson stopped, turning to face her with a frown. "I'm not trying to control you, Katherine. I simply wish to protect your reputation and mine. Surely you can understand that." Put that way, Katherine found it difficult to maintain her indignation. "Of course," she said finally. "I apologize if I caused any concern." His expression softened marginally. "It's forgotten. Now shall we rejoin the celebration? Your uncle has arranged for a toast." As they entered the parlor, Katherine caught sight of Wade slipping in through the front door, taking up a position near the back of the room. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded space, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, that they had each revealed more of themselves on the moonlit porch than was entirely wise. Then Uncle Douglas was calling for attention again. Champagne was being distributed, and Katherine was drawn back into her role as the delighted bride-to-be. But as glasses were raised to her future happiness, Katherine found herself wondering if happiness might take forms she'd never dared to imagine, forms that had nothing to do with security or social position, and everything to do with the freedom to choose her own path. Forms that were now, perhaps, forever beyond her reach. The last 2 weeks had been the longest of Wade's life. He'd thrown himself into work at the Diamond B, volunteering for the most grueling tasks, mending fences in the far pastures, breaking the wildest horses, riding night guard when no one else wanted the duty. Anything to exhaust his body and quiet his mind, anything to stop thinking about Katherine Clarke. It wasn't working. "You're gonna kill yourself at this rate," Hank commented one evening as they sat by the bunkhouse fire, "or that gelding is. Third horse you've run hard this week." Wade shrugged, focusing on the coffee cup in his hands. "Just doing my job." This about the Blackwell girl. When Wade's head snapped up, Hank chuckled knowingly. "Figured as much. Seen the way you look at her the few times she's been in town. Like a starving man eyeing a steak dinner he can't afford." "She's engaged to Peterson," Wade said flatly. "End of story." Hank snorted. "Engaged ain't married. And that gal looks about as happy with the arrangement as a cat in a rainstorm." "Not my business," Wade insisted, though the words rang hollow even to his own ears. "Could be," Hank said, leaning forward. "Word is she's been asking questions around town, about you." Wade nearly dropped his coffee cup. "What?" "MHMM. Martha over at the general store says Miss Clarke came in for writing paper yesterday and got to talking. Asked if Martha knew you, how long you'd been in these parts, that sort of thing. Casual-like but curious." A dangerous warmth kindled in Wade's chest. He ruthlessly smothered it, probably just being polite. remembering the man who helped escort her to town. Maybe, Hank conceded, though his skeptical expression suggested otherwise. Or maybe the lady's having second thoughts about tying herself to a man cold enough to freeze whiskey. Wade stood abruptly. I'm turning in. Early start tomorrow. As he lay on his bunk in the darkened bunkhouse, listening to the snores and creaks of the other men settling in for the night, Wade couldn't suppress the memory of Katherine standing on Blackwell's porch in the moonlight, her face animated as she spoke of her dreams that had nothing to do with being a doctor's wife in a frontier town. No, she'd wanted education, adventure, the chance to make something of herself beyond what society prescribed for women of her class. Wade had recognized the yearning in her voice because he'd felt something similar himself after the war, that hunger for meaning, for a life determined by one's own choices rather than the expectations of others. Peterson would never understand that hunger. He'd crush it, deliberately or not, beneath the weight of his rigid expectations of what a wife should be. The thought made Wade's jaw clench, but what business was it of his? Katherine had made her choice, or had accepted the choice made for her, which amounted to the same thing in practical terms. In 4 weeks she would be Mrs. James Peterson, and that would be that. Except Wade couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't right. That Katherine deserved more than a life of quiet desperation. That someone should stand up and say so before it was too late, someone like him. Wade rolled onto his side, punching his pillow in frustration. Such thinking was madness. He was a cowhand with nothing to his name but a good horse, a month's wages, and a dream of someday having a small ranch of his own. What could he possibly offer a woman like Katherine Clarke? Nothing but heartache and hardship. Yet the next morning, when Blackwell's foreman announced they needed 2 men to drive a herd of cattle into town for shipping, Wade volunteered immediately. It had been nearly a week since he'd had reason to go into Cottonwood Springs, and suddenly the thought of another day mending fences in the back country was unbearable. Just a glimpse, he told himself as they drove the cattle along the dusty road toward town. Just to assure himself she was well, that she was happy, or at least resigned to her approaching marriage. Then he could put this foolishness behind him once and for all. The cattle drive took most of the morning, with the animals balking at every stream crossing and patch of shadow. By the time they delivered the herd to the holding pens near the railroad depot, it was well past noon. I'm headed to the saloon, said Travis, the other cowhand who'd accompanied the drive. Coming. Wade shook his head. Got some errands to run first. Meet you there in an hour or so. Travis shrugged and headed off toward the Last Chance Saloon, while Wade made his way up Main Street, ostensibly toward the general store. In reality, he was scanning the boardwalks for a glimpse of rich brown hair and a blue dress, the color Katherine had worn the last time he'd seen her in town. He didn't have to look far. As he approached the newspaper office, the door opened and Katherine emerged, clutching a small package. She was dressed in a simpler gown than he'd seen her wear before, a practical day dress of deep green cotton, with her hair partially pinned up beneath a modest bonnet. The sight of her struck him like a physical blow. She looked up and their eyes met across the busy street. For a moment she seemed frozen in place, color rising in her cheeks. Then to Wade's surprise, she smiled and raised a hand in greeting. Before he could question the wisdom of his actions, Wade was crossing the street toward her, removing his hat as he approached. Miss Clarke. Good afternoon. Mr. Harrington, she replied, her voice warming as she added, or Wade if we're to continue using given names. The memory of their conversation on Blackwell's porch hung between them. Katherine, then, he said, unable to suppress a smile. You're well. Very well, thank you. She gestured to the package in her hands. I've just been speaking with Mr. Roberts at the newspaper. He's agreed to consider some articles I've written about my journey west and my impressions of the territory. Wade's eyebrows rose in surprise and admiration. You're writing for the paper. Katherine nodded, a spark of genuine excitement in her eyes. Just small pieces, and I've no idea if they're publishable. But Mr. Roberts was encouraging. He said Eastern perspectives on frontier life are always of interest to readers. That's wonderful, Wade said sincerely. Congratulations. She beamed at him and Wade felt something twist in his chest. This was the real Katherine, passionate, determined, full of life. Not the subdued young woman he'd glimpsed at social gatherings these past weeks, standing dutifully beside Peterson with a fixed smile that never reached her eyes. I've also been helping Miss Winters at the school, she continued. The building is finally complete and classes begin next week. She's asked me to assist with the younger children's reading lessons. Sounds like you're finding your place here, Wade observed. Something flickered across Katherine's face, a shadow of doubt or resignation. I'm trying to, she said more quietly. A loaded silence fell between them, broken when Katherine glanced up at the position of the sun. I should be getting back. Uncle Douglas expects me for luncheon, and I'm already late. I'll walk with you, Wade offered, falling into step beside her as she began moving along the boardwalk. If that's all right. Very much so, she said with a smile that suggested the propriety of such an arrangement was the least of her concerns. They walked in companionable silence for half a block before Katherine spoke again. May I ask what brings you to town today? Mr. Davis mentioned you've been working in the far pastures lately. The fact that she'd been discussing his whereabouts with Hank sent a jolt of pleasure through Wade that he immediately tried to suppress. Cattle Drive, shipping some steers east on tomorrow's train. Katherine nodded. Of course, Uncle Douglas mentioned something about that. She hesitated, then asked, have you given any more thought to your own ranch? You mentioned wanting something that was just yours. The fact that she remembered their conversation in such detail warmed him. Been saving, he admitted. Got my eye on a small parcel up Boulder Creek Way. Nothing fancy, but good water and enough grazing for a modest herd. That sounds wonderful, Katherine said, and the genuine enthusiasm in her voice encouraged him to continue. Has a little cabin that needs work, but the bones are good. Previous owner died last winter, and his family back east wants to sell. Just need another 6 months or so to have enough for the down payment. You'd be very good at it, I think, Katherine said thoughtfully. Building something of your own. Wade glanced at her, touched by her confidence. What makes you say that? She considered for a moment. You notice things, details others miss, and you're patient. I saw that on our journey from the junction. Building a ranch from scratch would require both those qualities, I imagine. Her assessment, so perceptive, so generous, left Wade momentarily speechless. Before he could formulate a response, they rounded a corner and nearly collided with Dr. James Peterson emerging from his office. The doctor's eyes narrowed as he took in the pair walking together, his thin lips pressing into a disapproving line. Katherine. What a surprise to find you here. James, Katherine replied, her voice immediately adopting the formal tone Wade had come to associate with her public persona. I was just returning from the newspaper office. Mr. Harrington kindly offered to escort me. Peterson's cold gaze shifted to Wade. How gallant, though I'm sure Cottonwood Springs is safe enough for a lady to walk unaccompanied in broad daylight. The subtle rebuke wasn't lost on Wade, but he kept his expression neutral. Just being neighborly, Doc. Indeed, Peterson turned back to Katherine. I was planning to call on you this evening to discuss some details about the wedding. Your uncle mentioned the dressmaker has completed your gown. Katherine nodded. Yes, the final fitting was yesterday. Excellent, Peterson checked his pocket watch. I have patience waiting until this evening then, he nodded stiffly to Wade. Harrington. Doc, Wade replied with equal brevity. As Peterson returned to his office, Wade could feel Katherine tense beside him. The easy camaraderie they'd shared moments before had evaporated, replaced by a palpable discomfort. I should continue on alone, she said quietly. It wouldn't be appropriate for us to be seen walking together after that encounter. Wade wanted to argue, to tell her that Peterson had no right to dictate whom she could walk with or talk to. But he knew she was right. Gossip spread quickly in small towns, and the last thing he wanted was to damage her reputation. Of course, he said instead, stepping back slightly. But Katherine. She looked up at him, a question in her eyes. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you know where to find me." Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings neither could safely express, of possibilities that circumstances wouldn't allow them to explore. "Thank you, Wade," she said softly. "That means more than you know." Then she was walking away, her back straight, her head held high, every inch the proper lady engaged to the town doctor. But just before she turned the corner toward her uncle's house, she glanced back, and the longing in that brief look nearly brought Wade to his knees. He stood there on the boardwalk long after she disappeared from view, his heart pounding with emotions he had no right to feel, his mind racing with thoughts he had no right to think. Hank had been right. Engaged wasn't married. There was still time, but time for what? What could he possibly do? Declare his feelings for a woman promised to another man? Suggest she throw away security and respectability for what? A penniless cowboy with nothing but dreams. Wade jammed his hat back on his head and turned toward the saloon. He needed a drink. Several, in fact. Enough to drown these impossible thoughts before they led him, and possibly Katherine, to disaster. Yet even as he pushed through the swinging doors of the Last Chance, Wade knew with grim certainty that no amount of whiskey would erase Katherine Clarke from his heart. The dress was beautiful, ivory satin with delicate lace overlay, tiny pearl buttons marching down the back, a modest train that whispered across the floor as Katherine moved. The seamstress, Mrs. Olson, circled her with pins and measuring tape, making final adjustments 2 weeks before the wedding. "Stand straight now, Miss Clarke," the older woman instructed, tugging at the bodice. "We want everything perfect for your big day." Katherine obediently adjusted her posture, staring at her reflection in the cheval mirror. The young woman who gazed back seemed like a stranger, pale, constrained, her expression a careful mask of appropriate anticipation. "You look lovely, Katherine," said Mrs. Miller from her seat near the window. The sheriff's wife had accompanied her to this final fitting, Uncle Douglas having declared such matters women's business. "Thank you," Katherine replied automatically. Mrs. Miller's kind eyes studied her shrewdly. "You know, dear, when I married Tom, I was so nervous I nearly fainted during the ceremony. It's natural to have doubts before such a big step." Katherine met the older woman's gaze in the mirror. "Were you happy after?" Mrs. Miller's face softened. "Yes, but Tom and I had a courtship of nearly 2 years before we wed. We knew our hearts. Your situation is different." Different, such a diplomatic way of describing an arrangement in which her heart had never been consulted. "There now," Mrs. Olson said, placing the last pin. "Perfect. You can change, and I'll have this ready for you by next Friday." As Katherine carefully removed the wedding gown, her mind drifted to her encounter with Wade the previous week. They hadn't spoken since, though she glimpsed him once, riding out of town with several other Diamond B hands. He hadn't seen her watching from the milliner's shop window, hadn't noticed how her breath caught at the sight of him, tall and straight in the saddle, his face set in lines of quiet determination. It was foolish to think of him. Dangerous. Wade Harrington represented everything she couldn't have: freedom, passion, the chance to discover who she truly was beyond the constraints of society's expectations. James Peterson offered security, respectability, a defined role in a community that was quickly becoming her home. The logical choice was clear, had been clear from the moment Uncle Douglas proposed the arrangement. So why did her heart rebel against that logic with increasing desperation as her wedding day approached? "Katherine," Mrs. Miller's voice broke into her thoughts. "Are you all right, dear? You've been staring at that wall for quite some time." Katherine blinked, realizing she'd been standing motionless, half-dressed, lost in her thoughts. "I'm sorry, just wedding nerves, I suppose." "Mrs. Miller helped her finish fastening her day dress, then surprised Katherine by taking her hands firmly. "Katherine, forgive me for speaking plainly, but I've come to care for you these past weeks. If there's anything troubling you, anything at all, I hope you know you can confide in me." The kindness in the older woman's eyes nearly undid Katherine's careful composure. For a wild moment, she considered pouring out everything: her doubts about marrying James, her growing feelings for Wade, her fear that she was sacrificing her true self for the sake of security. But what would be the point? Mrs. Miller, kind as she was, couldn't change Catherine's circumstances. No one could. "You're very good to worry," Catherine said instead, squeezing the older woman's hands. "But I'm fine, truly. Just overwhelmed with all the preparations." Mrs. Miller didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded. "Well, let's get you home then. I believe your uncle mentioned something about meeting with Reverend Simmons this afternoon to discuss the ceremony." Outside Mrs. Olson's shop, the summer day was in full, glorious bloom. Cottonwood Springs bustled with activity, freight wagons rumbling down the street, shoppers moving from store to store, children darting between buildings in games of tag. It had rained the previous night, settling the ever-present dust and leaving the air fresh and sweet-smelling. As they walked toward Uncle Douglas's house, Catherine found herself studying the town with new eyes, not as a temporary stopping place, but as her future home. In 2 weeks she would be Mrs. Peterson, mistress of the White House at the north end of Main Street, a permanent fixture in this frontier community. The thought should have comforted her. Instead, it filled her with a nameless dread. "Oh, Mrs. Miller," exclaimed, interrupting Catherine's dark thoughts. "I nearly forgot to mention, the Ladies' Aid Society is hosting a picnic this Sunday after church. A sort of welcome for you and farewell to summer. Everyone's quite excited about it." Catherine summoned a smile. "How lovely, I'll look forward to it." They had reached Uncle Douglas's gate. Mrs. Miller patted Catherine's arm affectionately. "Try to rest, dear, you look tired. And remember what I said, if you need to talk, my door is always open." Alone in her room after luncheon, Catherine sat at the small writing desk near the window, a blank sheet of paper before her. She'd intended to work on another article for the newspaper. Mr. Roberts had published her first piece to general acclaim and had requested more, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself writing a letter she knew she could never send. "Dear Wade, I find myself thinking of you at the most inconvenient moments, while being fitted for my wedding gown, while discussing hymn selections with Reverend Simmons, while listening to James outline his expectations for our married life. Is that not the most terrible confession, that another man occupies my thoughts even as I prepare to become another's wife? Yet I cannot seem to help it. In our brief encounters you have seen me, truly seen me, in ways no one else has bothered to. You have listened to my dreams without dismissing them as impractical or inappropriate. You have made me feel that perhaps I am not merely an ornament or a convenience, but a person of value in my own right. I barely know you, and yet I feel I know you better than the man I am to marry in 2 weeks' time. Is that madness? Or is it simply the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who understands what it means to seek one's own path rather than follow the one laid out by others? If circumstances were different, if I were braver, if you were inclined toward permanence rather than the freedom you've sought, if my situation allowed me choices beyond the one I've made, perhaps we might have." Catherine stopped writing abruptly, horrified by the direction of her thoughts. What was she doing? Such sentiments were beyond inappropriate, they were dangerous, if anyone were to find such a letter. She quickly folded the paper and held it to the flame of a nearby candle, watching as the fire consumed her dangerous words, reducing them to ash. Then she opened the window, allowing the summer breeze to carry away the evidence of her momentary madness. It was time to accept reality. In 2 weeks she would marry James Peterson. She would become his wife, mistress of his household, perhaps eventually the mother of his children. She would make the best of the life she had chosen, or that had been chosen for her. She would find contentment, if not joy, in doing her duty and fulfilling her role with grace and dignity. And Wade Harrington would remain what he had always been meant to be, a brief, bright moment in her journey toward her proper place in the world. Nothing more. With renewed determination, Catherine smoothed a fresh sheet of paper on her desk and began to write an article about the upcoming school term and the importance of education on the frontier. This was constructive, this was appropriate, this was safe. Yet even as her pen moved across the paper, a small, rebellious voice in the back of her mind whispered that she was making the biggest mistake of her life, and that soon it would be too late to correct it. The Sunday picnic was Cottonwood Springs at its finest. Tables laden with food spread beneath the cottonwood trees that gave the town its name, children playing games on the grassy banks of the creek, couples strolling arm in arm, neighbors catching up on the week's news. After church services, it seemed the entire town had gathered for the event, dressed in their Sunday best despite the August heat. Wade hadn't planned to attend. He'd been avoiding town as much as possible since his last encounter with Katherine, throwing himself into work at the Diamond B with such intensity that even the foreman had commented on it. But Hank had insisted, arguing that free food and a chance to socialize with the unmarried daughters of local ranchers shouldn't be passed up. "You can't mope around the bunkhouse forever," Hank had said as they rode toward town that morning. "Besides, I heard Miss Jennings asking about you the other day. Pretty little thing, and her daddy owns the second largest spread in the county." Wade had grunted noncommittally. Louisa Jennings was indeed pretty, and by all accounts sweet-natured and accomplished. Any sensible cowboy would be flattered by her interest, but Wade didn't want Louisa Jennings. He wanted the woman currently standing beneath a cottonwood tree beside Dr. James Peterson, accepting congratulations and well wishes for their upcoming wedding. Katherine wore a pale blue dress that complemented her rich brown hair, which was arranged in a sophisticated style that nonetheless allowed a few curls to escape artfully around her face. She was smiling and nodding as Mrs. Hollister spoke to her animatedly, but even from a distance, Wade could see the strain behind her pleasant expression. "Stop staring," Hank muttered, elbowing him as they approached the food tables. "Folks are starting to notice." Wade tore his gaze away, focusing instead on filling a plate with fried chicken, corn bread, and potato salad. He found a relatively isolated spot beneath an old cottonwood and sat with his back against the trunk, determined to eat his meal in peace and then make an excuse to leave early. He had just taken his first bite when a shadow fell across his plate. Looking up, he found Sheriff Miller standing over him, his expression unreadable. "Harrington," the lawman said with a nod. "Mind if I join you?" Wade gestured to the ground beside him. "Free country, Sheriff." Miller eased himself down with a grunt, arranging his own plate on his lap. For several minutes they ate in companionable silence, watching the festivities unfold before them. Then the sheriff spoke without preamble. "My wife thinks Miss Clarke is making a mistake marrying Peterson." Wade nearly choked on his chicken. "Sir." Miller continued calmly, as if discussing the weather. "Sarah's spent quite a bit of time with the girl these past weeks. Says she's got a sharp mind, independent spirit, not the type to be happy as Peterson's wife." He took a bite of corn bread, chewed thoughtfully. "Sarah's usually right about these things." Wade set his plate aside, his appetite suddenly gone. "With all due respect, Sheriff, why are you telling me this?" Miller's shrewd eyes assessed him. "Because my wife also thinks Miss Clarke might have developed feelings for someone else. Someone who's been avoiding town lately." Heat crept up Wade's neck. "I've been busy at the ranch." Miller took a sip from his cup. "Would be a shame, wouldn't it? Girl like that, trapped in a marriage that stifles everything that makes her special. But then not much anyone can do about it. Arrangements have been made, announcements published. Wedding's a week from Saturday." Wade's hands clenched involuntarily. "What are you suggesting, Sheriff?" "Not suggesting anything," Miller replied mildly. "Just making conversation." He rose, brushing crumbs from his trousers. "Good chicken this year. Mrs. Hollister outdid herself." With a final, meaningful look, he moved off to join his wife, who was chatting with several ladies near the lemonade table. Wade sat motionless, the sheriff's words echoing in his mind. Could it be true? Did Katherine have feelings for him? And even if she did, what difference did it make? As Miller had pointed out, arrangements had been made, announcements published. Katherine was engaged to Peterson, and the wedding was less than 2 weeks away. Yet the seed the sheriff had planted took root, growing rapidly in the fertile soil of Wade's own hopes. If Katherine was unhappy, if she was marrying Peterson out of duty or necessity rather than love, didn't he owe it to her to at least speak up? To offer her a choice, even if that choice wasn't him. Across the picnic grounds, Katherine excused herself from Dr. Peterson's side and began walking toward the creek, apparently seeking a moment of solitude. Before Wade could question the wisdom of his actions, he was on his feet, moving to intercept her path. She spotted him when he was still several yards away, her eyes widening in surprise, and was it his imagination, or was there pleasure there too? "Wade," she said as he approached, his name a breathless whisper on her lips. "I didn't think you'd be here today." "Wasn't planning to come," he admitted. "Changed my mind." They stood awkwardly for a moment, too aware of curious eyes that might be watching them. "I was just going to walk by the creek," Katherine said finally. "Would you, that is, perhaps you'd like to join me?" Wade glanced over her shoulder to where Peterson stood deep in conversation with Blackwell and the mayor, his back to them. "Are you sure that's wise?" A flash of defiance crossed Katherine's face. "It's a public gathering and the creek is in full view of everyone. There's nothing improper about two acquaintances walking together." The emphasis she placed on acquaintances told Wade clearly that she was attempting to define their relationship in terms that would be acceptable to onlookers. He nodded his understanding and fell into step beside her, careful to maintain a proper distance between them. They walked in silence until they reached the creek bank, where the sounds of rushing water provided a measure of privacy from the picnic behind them. Katherine stared out at the clear mountain stream, her profile pensive in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. "You look beautiful today," Wade said quietly, the words escaping before he could consider their propriety. A flush rose in her cheeks. "Thank you." Another silence, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then Katherine turned to face him directly, her eyes searching his. "Why have you been avoiding town, Wade, avoiding me?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. "I thought it would be easier. For both of us." "Easier?" she repeated, a note of frustration entering her voice. "What exactly are we making easier by pretending the other doesn't exist?" Wade ran a hand through his hair, struggling to find words that wouldn't cross the invisible boundary between them. "Katherine, you're engaged to be married. In less than 2 weeks you'll be Peterson's wife. Whatever friendship has developed between us needs to respect that reality." "Friendship," she echoed, the word laden with meaning. "Is that what this is?" Wade met her gaze steadily. "You tell me." Katherine's composure cracked just for an instant, revealing a turmoil that matched his own. "I don't know what this is," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the sound of the creek. "I only know that when I'm with you I feel, seen, understood, as if I can breathe freely for the first time in months." She looked away, embarrassed by her own candor. "It's terribly inappropriate to say such things, I know." Wade took a step closer, still careful not to touch her. "Katherine, are you sure about marrying Peterson?" Her eyes flew back to his, widening in surprise at the directness of the question. "Because if you're not," Wade continued, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain she must hear it, "if there's any doubt in your mind, you should know that you have choices. The wedding can be postponed or canceled altogether." Katherine stared at him, her expression a complex mixture of hope and fear. "Choices? What choices do I have, Wade? I have no money, no family besides Uncle Douglas, no way to support myself." "You could write," Wade said earnestly. "Your article in the paper was excellent. Mr. Roberts would publish more, I'm sure of it. And Miss Winters would be delighted to have you teach at the school. She's told half the town how impressed she is with your educational ideas." Katherine shook her head, though something like yearning flickered in her eyes. "Even if that were true, where would I live? What would people say? An unmarried woman breaking an engagement, living alone. The scandal would be unbearable." "You could stay with the Millers," Wade suggested. "The sheriff as good as told me his wife would support you. Or with any of the other ladies who have befriended you these past weeks." "For how long?" Katherine asked, practical despite the emotion in her voice. "A few weeks, a month." "And then what?" Wade swallowed hard, knowing he was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Or you could marry someone else. Someone who would respect your dreams, support your ambitions. Someone who would see you for who you truly are and cherish that person." Catherine's breath caught. Someone like me, Wade finished for her, his voice rough with feeling. I know I don't have much to offer, just a cowhand's wages and dreams of a small ranch that might never materialize. I can't give you the security Peterson can, or the social position. But I would never ask you to be less than you are. I would never try to confine your spirit or limit your possibilities. Tears welled in Catherine's eyes. Wade. I love you, Katherine, he said simply, the words he'd been holding back for weeks finally breaking free. I think I have since that day at the stream when you looked out at the mountains with such wonder in your eyes. I know it's impossible. I know I have no right. But if there's any chance at all that you might feel something for me in return, I had to speak before it was too late. A tear slipped down Catherine's cheek. I do, she whispered. Feel something for you, I mean, something I've never felt before, something that terrifies me with its intensity. Joy and anguish warred in Wade's heart at her confession. Then don't marry him, he urged. Whatever happens between us, even if you decide I'm not what you want either, don't tie yourself to a man who will never understand the person you truly are. Katherine looked past him toward the picnic grounds, where her future was laid out in neat, orderly lines. Then she looked back at Wade, who represented everything unknown, uncertain, and potentially wonderful. I need time, she said finally. Time to think, to consider. This isn't just about my happiness. There are obligations, expectations. People who would be hurt. Wade nodded, though it took every ounce of his self-control not to pull her into his arms. I understand, but don't wait too long, Katherine. Some choices, once made, can't be unmade. Before she could respond, a voice called from behind them. Katherine, your uncle is looking for you. They turned to find Mrs. Miller approaching, her expression carefully neutral. If she'd overheard any of their conversation, she gave no sign of it. Of course, Katherine replied, quickly composing herself. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. As Katherine moved to follow the older woman back toward the picnic, she glanced over her shoulder at Wade, her eyes communicating what her voice could not. That their conversation had changed everything, and nothing would ever be the same again. Wade watched her go, hope and fear battling within him. He'd laid his heart bare, crossed lines that shouldn't have been crossed. Now all he could do was wait to see if Katherine would choose a safe, secure future as Mrs. James Peterson, or risk everything for a chance at true happiness, with him or without him. The week that followed was the longest of Katherine's life. By day, she went through the motions of a bride preparing for her wedding, final dress fittings, meetings with Reverend Simmons about the ceremony, discussions with Mrs. Jenkins about the wedding breakfast to be held at Uncle Douglas's home afterward. She smiled and nodded and made all the appropriate responses while her mind raced with Wade's words, his declaration, the choice he had laid before her. By night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her bedroom, weighing security against passion, duty against desire, the known against the unknown. Marrying James would provide everything she'd been raised to value: stability, respectability, a defined role in society. She would want for nothing material. She would be cared for, protected. It was the sensible choice, the proper choice, the choice any rational woman in her position would make without hesitation. Yet whenever she imagined herself standing before the altar, pledging to love, honor, and obey James Peterson for the rest of her life, a cold dread settled in her stomach. She would be selling her soul for security, locking away parts of herself that would wither and die in the airless confines of such a marriage. And then there was Wade. Dear, honest Wade, who looked at her and saw not a possession to be acquired or a role to be filled, but a whole person with dreams and desires of her own. Wade, who offered no security beyond his strong arms and loyal heart, no certainty except that he would stand beside her as she discovered who she truly was and what she truly wanted. Loving Wade would mean stepping off the carefully constructed path that had guided her life thus far. It would mean scandal, disapproval, perhaps even ostracism from the society that had welcomed her. It would mean exchanging comfort for struggle, predictability for adventure, safety for passion. It terrified her, and it called to her with a siren song she found increasingly difficult to resist. On Wednesday evening, 3 days before the wedding, Katherine sat in Uncle Douglas's study, ostensibly reviewing the final guest list but in reality lost in her tumultuous thoughts. Her uncle entered, startling her from her reverie. "Ah, Katherine, good. I was hoping to speak with you," he said, lowering his substantial frame into the leather chair behind his desk. Everything proceeding satisfactorily with the wedding preparations. Katherine nodded. "Yes, Uncle, Mrs. Jenkins has everything well in hand." "Excellent, excellent." He studied her face for a moment, his expression growing serious. "You seem distracted these past few days. I trust you're not experiencing cold feet." Katherine hesitated, sensing an opportunity to broach the subject that had been consuming her thoughts. "Not cold feet exactly, Uncle, but I have been reflecting on the significance of the step I'm about to take." Blackwell's bushy eyebrows rose. "Naturally, marriage is indeed a significant step, all the more reason I'm pleased you're entering into such an advantageous match. James is a fine man, educated, established, respected. He'll provide admirably for you." "Yes," Katherine agreed carefully, "he is certainly all those things, but I've been wondering, is that enough? For a lifetime of marriage, I mean." Her uncle frowned, clearly puzzled by the question. "What more could you possibly require? The man has a good income, a fine house, an impeccable reputation. Many young women would be thrilled with such a match." Katherine took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "What about love, Uncle Douglas, companionship, shared interests and aspirations?" Blackwell waved a dismissive hand. "Romantic notions, my dear, pleasant if they develop, certainly, but hardly the foundation for a successful union. Your aunt and I had an arranged marriage, you know, barely knew each other when we wed. Yet we built a satisfactory life together over 30 years. Satisfactory, Katherine repeated, the word falling like a stone in her heart. Was that all she could hope for, a satisfactory life? Indeed. Blackwell leaned forward, his tone becoming more serious. "Katherine, I understand your father filled your head with idealistic notions about marriage. Edward was always the dreamer in the family. It's what led to his financial ruin in the end. But I'm a practical man, and I've arranged a practical match for you. James will provide the security your father failed to ensure, and you will bring refinement and social grace to his household. It's a fair exchange." Katherine felt as if she were suffocating under the weight of his pragmatism. "And if I were to suggest that perhaps Dr. Peterson and I are not well suited to each other?" Her uncle's expression hardened. "I would suggest that you're allowing pre-wedding nerves to cloud your judgment. The match is excellent, the arrangements are made, the community expects it. To back out now would be not only foolish but scandalous." "I see," Katherine said quietly. Blackwell's tone softened slightly. "My dear, I promised your father on his deathbed that I would see you settled securely. This marriage fulfills that promise. James is a good man who will treat you with respect and consideration. In time, affection will grow. It nearly always does." Katherine nodded, recognizing that further discussion would be futile. Her uncle saw marriage as a business arrangement, a merging of assets and advantages. The notion that she might want more, might need more, was incomprehensible to him. "Now," Blackwell continued, his tone brightening, "I have some good news. The house on Pine Street, the one adjacent to James's, has come up for sale. I'm considering purchasing it as a wedding gift to you both. It would make an excellent office for James, freeing up space in your home for future additions to your family." The casual reference to children, James's children, sent a chill through Katherine. The walls seemed to be closing in, her future shrinking to a narrow corridor with only one possible path. "How generous of you, Uncle," she managed to say. "I'm sure James will be pleased." Blackwell beamed, clearly satisfied that any momentary doubts had been resolved. "Splendid. Now, I believe Mrs. Jenkins mentioned something about you needing to approve the final menu for the wedding breakfast." Katherine excused herself, retreating to her room with her thoughts in greater turmoil than before. Her uncle's reaction had confirmed what she already knew. There would be no support from that quarter if she chose to break her engagement. Quite the opposite. Uncle Douglas would view such a decision as not only foolish but a personal betrayal, a rejection of his efforts to secure her future. She moved to the window, gazing out at the star-filled Montana sky. Somewhere out there, Wade was perhaps looking at these same stars, wondering what she would decide, hoping against hope that she would choose a future that included him. Could she do it? Could she walk away from security, from respectability, from all the expectations that had shaped her life thus far? Could she bear the scandal, the disapproval, the uncertainty of a future built on nothing more solid than love and hope? As she stood there, a memory surfaced, her father, in one of his rare philosophical moods, speaking to her about choices. "The most important decisions in life, Katherine," he'd said, "are not between good and bad but between what is expected and what is true. Always choose truth, even when it's the harder path." The truth, what was her truth? That she did not love James Peterson and never would. That the thought of spending her life as his wife filled her with a despair so profound it threatened to consume her. That when she imagined her future, a future filled with purpose and passion and joy, it was Wade's face she saw beside her, Wade's hand holding hers, Wade's strength supporting her as she pursued her own dreams. That she loved him. Impossibly, irrationally, completely. The realization settled over her like a mantle, heavy with responsibility, yet somehow lightening her spirit. The path forward was suddenly clear, though no less frightening for its clarity. Tomorrow she would speak to James. She would end their engagement, face the consequences of that decision, and then she would find Wade and tell him her truth. Whatever came after, whether he still wanted her, whether they could build a life together against all odds, at least she would be facing it as herself, not as the pale shadow of the woman she was meant to be. Katherine moved to her desk, pulled out a sheet of paper, and began to write. No burning this letter when it was done. This one would be delivered, would set in motion changes that couldn't be undone. Her hand trembled slightly, but her resolve was firm. It was time to choose truth over expectation, love over security, the unknown over the safely mapped-out path. It was time to choose herself. The Diamond B Ranch was quiet in the pre-dawn light, most of the hands still asleep in the bunkhouse after a late night bringing in strays from the north pasture. Wade sat on the top rail of the corral, watching as the first golden rays of sun touched the distant mountains. He hadn't slept much, his mind too full of Katherine and the choice she faced. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday, 2 days away. He'd heard nothing since their conversation at the picnic, though he'd ridden into town twice on pretext of picking up supplies, hoping for a glimpse of her, a message, anything that might indicate which way she was leaning. Nothing, just sympathetic glances from Mrs. Miller and knowing looks from Hank, who'd figured out the situation without being told. "Harrington," the foreman's voice broke into his thoughts, "got a visitor for you, up at the main house." Wade frowned, jumping down from the rail. "This early, who is it?" The foreman shrugged. "Didn't say, just asked for you specifically. Mr. Blackwell said to send you up when you were found." Wade's heart began to pound. Could it be Katherine? Had she made her decision and come to tell him personally? He quickly brushed dust from his clothes and ran a hand through his hair before heading toward the imposing 2-story house where Douglas Blackwell lived when in residence at the ranch. Wade had rarely been inside. Ranch hands were generally not invited to cross that particular threshold, but the foreman pointed him toward the study off the main hall. Taking a deep breath, Wade knocked on the partially open door. "Enter," called a male voice that definitely did not belong to Katherine. Wade pushed the door open to find James Peterson seated in one of the leather chairs facing Blackwell's desk. The banker himself stood by the window, his expression grim. "Harrington," Blackwell said, his tone clipped, "thank you for joining us." Wade remained in the doorway, suddenly wary. "Mr. Blackwell, Doc, what can I do for you gentlemen?" Peterson rose, his tall, thin frame radiating tightly controlled anger. "You can explain, Mr. Harrington, why my fiancée has broken our engagement 2 days before our wedding." The words hit Wade like a physical blow, equal parts shock, joy, and concern. Katherine had done it. She'd broken the engagement, but clearly she hadn't mentioned his involvement, or Peterson wouldn't be asking for an explanation. "I'm sorry to hear that, Doc," Wade said carefully. but I'm not sure what it has to do with me. Don't play the innocent, Peterson snapped. Katherine delivered a letter to me yesterday afternoon, ending our engagement without explanation. Then this morning, Mrs. Miller let slip that Katherine was seen in deep conversation with you at the church picnic, a conversation that left her visibly emotional. Blackwell moved away from the window, his face flushed with anger. I've invested considerable time and resources in establishing Katherine in this community, Harrington. The match with Dr. Peterson was ideal, advantageous for all concerned. Now I learn that one of my own ranch hands has been filling my niece's head with romantic nonsense, undermining an arrangement that would have secured her future. Wade straightened, meeting Blackwell's glare steadily. With all due respect, sir, Katherine is a grown woman capable of making her own decisions. If she's decided not to marry Dr. Peterson, I have to believe she has good reasons. Reasons you provided, Peterson interjected coldly. What did you offer her, Harrington? What pretty lies did you tell to turn her against a match that any sensible woman would consider fortunate? Wade's temper flared. I told her the truth, that she deserves more than a marriage based on convenience and social advantage. That she has talents and dreams worth pursuing, that she shouldn't settle for security at the cost of her happiness. Happiness, Blackwell scoffed. What do you know of providing happiness to a woman like Katherine? You're a cowhand with nothing to your name but the horse you ride and the clothes on your back. What future could you possibly offer her? That's between Katherine and me, Wade replied, his voice steady despite the anger churning inside him. And for the record, I didn't ask her to choose me over the doctor. I asked her to choose herself, her own happiness, over a life that would slowly extinguish everything special about her. Peterson's pale face flushed with indignation. How dare you presume to know what kind of life I would provide for my wife? Katherine would have wanted for nothing in my home. Except love, Wade said simply. Except being valued for who she is, not just what role she could fill in your life. A tense silence filled the room. Then Blackwell moved behind his desk, his expression hardening into the mask of a businessman about to close a difficult negotiation. Let's be practical, Harrington. You've worked for me for 3-4 years, been a good hand, reliable, I appreciate that, so I'm going to make you an offer. He pulled out a ledger book and a checkbook, $2,000 cash. Enough to buy that parcel up Boulder Creek way you've had your eye on, with plenty left over for stock and improvements. Wade stared at him uncomprehending. Sir. In exchange, Blackwell continued, you leave the Diamond Bee today. You don't speak to Katherine again, don't try to see her, don't communicate with her in any way. You take the money, buy your ranch, and build your life elsewhere. Katherine stays here, reconsiders her hasty decision regarding Dr. Peterson and eventually makes a suitable match, if not with the good doctor, then with another man of appropriate standing. Wade felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Blackwell was trying to buy him off, to remove him from Katherine's life as one might remove an inconvenient obstacle from a road. No, Wade said, his voice low but firm. No, sir. I won't take your money, and I won't disappear from Katherine's life unless she asks me to. Blackwell's face darkened. Don't be a fool, boy. This is more money than you'd earn in 5 years of punching cows. A chance to have that ranch you've talked about. All you have to do is walk away from a woman who's far above your station anyway. Wade's hands clenched at his sides. Katherine isn't a business transaction, Mr. Blackwell. She's a person, a remarkable person who deserves the chance to make her own choices. If she chooses me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that choice. If she doesn't, I'll respect her decision. But I won't be bought off, and I won't pretend I don't love her just because you think I'm not good enough for her. Peterson made a disgusted sound. Love, the last refuge of a man with nothing substantial to offer. Maybe so, Doc, Wade replied evenly. But it's more than you ever offered her. Blackwell slammed his ledger closed. I see reasoning with you is pointless. Very well. Consider your employment with the Diamond Bee terminated, effective immediately. You have until noon to collect your belongings from the bunkhouse and leave my property. Wade nodded, having expected nothing less. "Yes, sir, I'll be gone within the hour." He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway, looking back at the two angry men. "Just so we're clear, I'm not giving up on Katherine, not unless she tells me herself that's what she wants." With that, he left the study, closing the door firmly behind him. As he strode across the yard toward the bunkhouse, his mind raced with implications and possibilities. He just lost his job, his home for the past 3 years, and any reference that might help him secure another position in the area. But Katherine had broken her engagement. She'd chosen herself over the safe, secure future Peterson offered. The question now was whether she'd choose Wade as part of that new, uncertain future, and where they would go from here if she did. By the time he reached the bunkhouse, Wade had the beginnings of a plan. It was risky, dependent on factors beyond his control, but it was the best he could do with limited time and resources. Now he just needed to find Katherine before Blackwell or Peterson did, and hope that the choice she'd made was one that included him. Katherine sat in Mrs. Miller's cozy parlor, a cup of untouched tea cooling on the table beside her. She'd arrived on the sheriff's wife's doorstep late the previous evening, letter of broken engagement delivered, bags hastily packed, seeking refuge from the storm she knew would break once her uncle discovered what she had done. Mrs. Miller had welcomed her without question, offering both a spare bedroom and unconditional support. "I've been hoping you'd find the courage to follow your heart," the older woman had said as she helped Katherine settle in. "Though I must say your timing is dramatic, 2 days before the wedding." Katherine had managed a shaky laugh. "I'm sorry for any inconvenience, I couldn't go through with it. Not when I realized I'd be living a lie for the rest of my life." Mrs. Miller had patted her hand reassuringly. "No need to explain, dear. Tom and I are delighted to have you stay with us for as long as you need. Though I suspect your uncle won't be pleased when he discovers where you've gone." That had been an understatement. This morning, a furious Douglas Blackwell had arrived at the Miller's door, demanding to see his niece. Sheriff Miller had intercepted him on the porch, their voices carrying clearly through the partially open window. "She's not coming back, Douglas," the sheriff had said firmly. "Katherine is 20 years old, a grown woman by any standard. She has the right to make her own decisions, including where she lives and whom she marries." "She's making a terrible mistake," Blackwell had fumed, "throwing away a secure future on some romantic fantasy. Maybe. Or maybe she's saving herself from a lifetime of unhappiness. Either way, it's her choice to make. That cowboy put ideas in her head, Harrington." "Wade Harrington is a good man," the sheriff had interrupted. "Honest, hardworking, decent. Whether Katherine's decision has anything to do with him is her business, not yours or mine." "He's been fired," Blackwell had stated coldly. "I want him out of Cottonwood Springs by nightfall." The sheriff's voice had hardened. "You can fire him from your ranch, Douglas. You can't run him out of town. This isn't your private kingdom." Their argument had continued for several more minutes before Blackwell had finally departed, leaving a message that Katherine was welcome to return to his home when she came to her senses. Now Katherine sat in the parlor, wondering what would happen next. She'd broken her engagement, left her uncle's house, and effectively burned the bridges to her secure future. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, except for one thing. She needed to see Wade to tell him what she'd done, to discover if his feelings remained unchanged now that she was free to return them. But how to find him? If Uncle Douglas had truly fired him from the Diamond B, where would he go? The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. Katherine moved to the window, peering out to see Wade himself dismounting in front of the sheriff's house, his expression tense but determined. Her heart leaped into her throat. Without waiting for Mrs. Miller to answer the door, Katherine rushed outside, heedless of propriety or appearances. Wade turned at the sound of the door opening, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Katherine," he said, his voice caressing her name. "You're here, I hoped." "I broke the engagement," she blurted out, suddenly shy despite her impulsive action. "Yesterday, I told James I couldn't marry him. That it wouldn't be fair to either of us. Wade took a step toward her, then stopped, mindful of the public setting. I know, he and your uncle confronted me this morning. I've been fired from the Diamond B. Katherine gasped. Oh, Wade, I'm so sorry, I never meant. He shook his head, cutting off her apology. Don't be, it was worth it. His eyes searched hers intently. Katherine, I need to know, did you end things with Peterson because of what I said, because of failings for me? Yes, she admitted, her cheeks flushing. And no, I ended things with James because I realized I could never be happy as his wife, never be truly myself in the life he offered. But the courage to make that choice, that came from you. From knowing that someone saw me, really saw me, and valued what they saw. Wade's expression softened. And now, what do you want now, Katherine? She took a deep breath, finally giving voice to the truth that had been growing in her heart for weeks. I want you, Wade. I want a chance to discover who we might be together. I want the freedom to become the person I'm meant to be, with someone who will support that journey rather than constrain it. The joy that transformed Wade's features was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, then all at once gloriously bright. I want that too, he said, his voice rough with emotion, more than I've ever wanted anything. Katherine glanced around, suddenly aware that several passers-by had slowed to observe their conversation. Cottonwood Springs would be buzzing with gossip within the hour. Perhaps we should continue this discussion inside, she suggested, gesturing toward the miller's front door. Wade nodded, though he made no move to follow her. Actually, I came to ask you something specific, something that can't wait. Katherine tilted her head questioningly. What is it? Wade took a deep breath. The stage to Boulder City leaves in an hour. I've booked 2 seats. He hesitated, then plunged ahead. Come with me, Katherine, today, now. We can be married in Boulder City, start fresh where your uncle's influence doesn't reach. Katherine stared at him, stunned by the suddenness of his proposal. Married today, but we've barely. I know, Wade acknowledged, his expression earnest. It's fast, too fast probably, but your uncle is determined to get me out of your life one way or another. He even tried to buy me off this morning, offered me enough money to buy that ranch I told you about. He didn't, Katherine breathed, appalled but not entirely surprised. He did. I refused, of course, but he won't stop, Katherine. Not as long as he thinks he can bring you around to his way of thinking. Wade reached for her hands, propriety be damned. I'm not asking because I want to rush you, or because I think we need to be married to be together. I'm asking because I love you and I want to build a life with you. A life where you can write, teach, pursue whatever dreams you have, while I work toward building us a home of our own. Katherine looked down at their joined hands, her mind racing. It was madness, running away with a man she barely knew, marrying him with nothing but love and hope to sustain them. Yet the alternative, staying in Cottonwood Springs, facing her uncle's manipulation and the town's judgment day after day, seemed equally impossible. And Wade was offering her not just his heart but the freedom to be herself, to discover who she might become when not constrained by others' expectations. Boulder City, she said slowly, that's where the land is. The ranch you want to buy. Wade nodded. About 10 miles outside town, it's not much, just a cabin and 100 acres. But the land is good, with year-round water and plenty of grazing. I've been saving for a down payment, but without my job at the Diamond B. I have money, Katherine said suddenly. At Wade's surprised look, she explained, not much but some. My mother left me a small inheritance that my father couldn't touch, jewelry mostly, that I brought with me. It should be enough to help with a down payment, at least until you find work again. Hope bloomed in Wade's eyes. Does that mean? Katherine squeezed his hands, her decision crystallizing in that moment. Yes, I'll go with you to Boulder City. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to the future we might build together, whatever form it takes. Wade's face lit with such joy that Katherine's lingering doubts melted away. This was right, terrifying, uncertain, potentially disastrous, but right. I need to pack, she said, practical concerns asserting themselves. And tell the Millers, they've been so kind, I can't just disappear without a word. Of course, Wade agreed. The stage leaves at 10. I'll meet you there. Katherine nodded, then impulsively stood on tiptoe to press a swift kiss to his cheek. I'll be there, don't leave without me. Wade's smile was radiant. Never. The Boulder City Courthouse was a simple building of red brick, its modest dignity befitting its function as the seat of justice and governance for the growing mining town. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through tall windows, casting golden rectangles across the worn wooden floor where Wade and Katherine stood before the justice of the peace. They had arrived in Boulder City just after noon, secured a marriage license with minimal questions from the clerk, and found a small hotel where Katherine could freshen up after the dusty stage journey. Wade had gone out briefly to purchase a ring, a simple gold band that cost most of his remaining savings, and to find witnesses for the ceremony. Now, with the justice of the peace intoning the solemn words that would bind them together as husband and wife, Wade could scarcely believe the turn his life had taken in the span of a single day. This morning he'd been a ranch hand with dwindling hopes and a broken heart. Now he stood beside the woman he loved, her hand warm in his, her eyes bright with the same wonder and trepidation that filled his own soul. "Do you, Wade Daniel Harrington, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the justice asked, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. "I do," Wade replied, his voice steady despite the emotion constricting his throat. "And do you, Katherine Elizabeth Clarke, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Katherine's smile was radiant as she looked up at Wade. "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife." The justice nodded approvingly. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Harrington." Wade gently cupped Katherine's face between his hands, still scarcely able to believe she was his to touch, to cherish, to love. Her eyes fluttered closed as he lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that sealed their vows, tender, reverent, and filled with promise. When they parted, Katherine's cheeks were flushed, her eyes shining with happy tears. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." Wade smiled, sliding the gold band onto her finger. "Mrs. Harrington." The simple address sent a thrill through Katherine that was visible in her expression. "It feels strange," she admitted. "But right." The witnesses, a kindly older couple who owned the hotel where they'd taken rooms, offered their congratulations before departing, leaving Wade and Katherine to walk back to the hotel alone in the gathering twilight. "What happens now?" Katherine asked as they strolled arm in arm through the bustling streets of Boulder City. Mining towns never truly slept, and even at this hour, saloons and restaurants were doing brisk business, the sidewalks crowded with miners and merchants and the occasional respectable couple. "Tomorrow we ride out to look at the land," Wade said. "If you like it, if you can imagine making a life there, we'll see about making an offer with what we have for a down payment. If not, we'll look elsewhere. There's plenty of good land in the territory. And if we can't afford anything right away." Wade squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Then I'll find work in town until we can. I'm good with horses, the livery might be hiring. Or I could sign on with one of the local ranches for the season." Katherine nodded thoughtfully. "And I could perhaps find work at the school or writing for the local paper. I noticed they have one, the Boulder City Sentinel." Wade marveled at her practical courage. Many women of her background would be horrified at the thought of working for wages, yet Katherine approached the possibility with clear-eyed determination. "We'll manage," he assured her. "It won't be easy at first, but we'll build something good together. I promise you that." When they reached the hotel, Wade suddenly swept Katherine into his arms, carrying her across the threshold of their room as she laughed in surprise. "What are you doing?" she asked as he set her gently on her feet. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," Wade replied with a smile. "It's tradition." Katherine's expression softened. "I like that tradition." As the door closed behind them, sealing them into the privacy of their first home together, temporary though it might be, a moment of shy awkwardness descended. They were husband and wife now with all that entailed, yet in many ways still strangers learning to navigate their new relationship. Katherine began, then stopped, a blush rising in her cheeks. Wade took her hands in his. "We have time, Katherine, all the time in the world. There's no rush for anything." The relief in her eyes was palpable, mixed with something that might have been disappointment. "It's not that I don't want. That is, I'm not afraid of." Wade pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I know, but this has been a day of enormous changes for both of us. Perhaps we could simply be together tonight, talk, learn more about each other. The rest will come naturally when we're ready." Katherine's tension visibly eased. "I'd like that very much." They sat together on the small sofa near the room's single window, the space between them gradually diminishing as conversation flowed more freely. Katherine told Wade about her childhood in Boston, her education, her dreams of becoming a teacher before her father's financial collapse changed everything. Wade shared stories of his years in the cavalry during the war, his wanderings afterward, his gradual discovery that the Montana Territory felt more like home than anywhere he'd ever been. "I used to think I was looking for a place," Wade admitted as night deepened around them. "Somewhere I could put down roots, build something lasting, but now I think maybe I was looking for a person all along. Someone to build that life with." Katherine leaned her head against his shoulder, fitting there as if the space had been designed for her. "I think perhaps I was doing the same, though I didn't recognize it. Searching for someone who would see me as I truly am, not just as I'm expected to be." Wade's arm tightened around her. "And now, do you regret any of it, leaving Peterson, leaving Cottonwood Springs, marrying a penniless cowboy with nothing but dreams to offer?" Katherine lifted her head to meet his gaze directly. "Not for a moment," she said firmly. "I've made many decisions in my life based on what was expected of me, what was sensible or proper. This is the first decision I've made based solely on what my heart told me was right. How could I regret that?" In answer, Wade lowered his mouth to hers, kissing her with all the love and promise and hope that filled his soul. This time, Katherine responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed closer, the last barriers of hesitation melting away. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Katherine Harrington, and I promise you this, whatever the future holds, whether wealth or poverty, joy or sorrow, we'll face it together as equals, partners in every sense of the word." Katherine's smile outshone the lamplight. "That's all I've ever wanted. A chance to write my own story, alongside someone who values me for exactly who I am." She brushed her fingers along his jaw, her touch feather-light yet deeply intimate. "I love you too, Wade Harrington. More than I thought possible." Outside their window, Boulder City continued its nighttime bustle, unaware of the miracle unfolding in one modest hotel room, two souls finding in each other not just passion or companionship, but the freedom to become their truest selves. And if their path forward was uncertain, their resources limited, their future fraught with challenges, well, those concerns could wait for morning. Tonight was for discovering each other, for celebrating the brave choice they had made, for beginning the great adventure of their life together. Tonight was for love. 6 months later. Snow blanketed the small cabin nestled against the sheltering pines of Boulder Creek. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, carrying with it the scent of burning pine and the promise of warmth within. The creek itself, not yet frozen despite the December cold, burbled cheerfully as it wound its way through the 100 acres that now officially belonged to Wade and Katherine Harrington. Inside the cabin, Katherine sat at the small desk beneath the window, adding the final lines to her weekly column for the Boulder City Sentinel. Frontier Reflections, as the column was called, had become something of a local sensation, with readers eagerly anticipating each installment of the Eastern lady's observations on Western life. "Finished?" Wade asked, looking up from where he was repairing a bridle near the fire. Katherine nodded, setting down her pen with satisfaction. "Just in time. Mr. Jensen will be by tomorrow to collect it when he delivers the mail." Wade rose, moving behind her to read over her shoulder, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "Cattle ranching in winter," he read aloud. "Sounds thrilling." Katherine laughed, leaning back against him. You'd be surprised how many people back east find the details of frontier cattle management fascinating. Mr. Collins at the Sentinel says my columns are being reprinted in newspapers as far away as Chicago and Philadelphia. Pride warmed Wade's voice. That's because you have a gift for making ordinary things interesting, for helping people see beauty and meaning in places they wouldn't think to look. Katherine turned in her chair to face him, her expression softening. I learned that from you, you know. You were the first person who ever truly saw me, who looked past what I was supposed to be and recognized who I actually was. Wade bent to kiss her, still marveling that he had the right to do so whenever he wished. 6 months of marriage had only deepened his love for this remarkable woman who had chosen him, who had taken a leap of faith into an uncertain future and never once looked back with regret. It hadn't been easy. The down payment on their land had consumed most of their combined resources, leaving precious little for supplies and livestock. Wade had found work breaking horses for nearby ranches, while Katherine divided her time between writing her column, teaching 3 days a week at the Boulder City School, and learning the skills necessary to be a rancher's wife. They'd weathered their share of challenges: a roof that leaked during autumn rains, a mare lost to snakebite, the back-breaking labor of preparing for their first winter. There had been arguments, misunderstandings, moments of doubt when the task of building a life from scratch seemed overwhelming. But there had also been joy, profound, sustaining joy that came from sharing each day with a true partner, from watching their dreams take tangible form with each improvement to the cabin, each addition to their small but growing herd, each triumph over the obstacles the frontier placed in their path. The Thompsons invited us for Christmas dinner, Katherine said as she organized her writing materials. Mrs. Thompson insisted we shouldn't be alone for the holiday. Wade smiled, thinking of their nearest neighbors, an older couple whose own children had moved east years before. The Thompsons had taken Wade and Katherine under their wing, offering advice, tools, and friendship that had proven invaluable during these first challenging months. That's kind of them, he said. Though I was looking forward to celebrating our first Christmas alone together. Katherine's eyes sparkled with mischief. We'll still have Christmas morning to ourselves, and Christmas Eve. And every day thereafter. Wade pulled her to her feet, into his arms. I like the sound of that, Mrs. Harrington. She wound her arms around his neck, her body fitting against his with the familiar comfort of coming home. Have I mentioned lately how glad I am that I didn't marry Dr. Peterson? Wade pretended to consider. Not since yesterday, I believe. Katherine laughed, then grew more serious. I had a letter from Mrs. Miller last week. She says James is engaged again to the banker's daughter from Silver Creek. Apparently, it's a very suitable match. And your uncle, any word from him? A shadow crossed Katherine's face. No. Not since the letter he sent after we left, telling me I was no longer welcome in his home or his life. She sighed. I've written twice more but received no reply. I think perhaps he truly meant what he said about disowning me. Wade tightened his arms around her. I'm sorry, Katherine. I know his rejection hurts you. She nodded against his chest. It does. But I made my choice with open eyes, knowing the likely consequences, and I would make the same choice again 1,000 times over. She looked up at him, her expression brightening. Besides, we're building our own family now, aren't we? Wade's heart skipped a beat at the particular emphasis she placed on those words. Katherine, are you saying? Her smile confirmed his suspicion before she spoke. Dr. Lewis confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We're going to have a baby, Wade, in early summer. Joy exploded through Wade's chest, so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. A baby, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Our baby. Katherine nodded, happy tears shining in her eyes. Our baby, the start of our family on our land in the home we're building together. Wade placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, overwhelmed by the miracle taking shape beneath his palm. A child, his child, a new life created from the love he and Katherine shared. Are you happy? Katherine asked softly, watching his face. Happy doesn't begin to describe it, Wade said honestly. Terrified, amazed, grateful beyond words, but mostly just incredibly, indescribably happy. Katherine covered his hand with her own. I feel the same way, scared of all the unknowns but so very certain that this is right. That we're right together. Wade drew her close again, breathing in the lavender scent of her hair, the unique essence that was simply Katherine. How far they had come from that first meeting on the dusty road from Elk Creek Junction, the reluctant bride-to-be and the cowboy tasked with escorting her to a future neither of them could have imagined would change so dramatically. "I love you," he whispered against her temple. "You and our child and the life we're building. I love all of it." Katherine tilted her face up to his, her eyes reflecting the same wonder and gratitude that filled his own heart. "And I love you, Wade Harrington, for seeing me, for choosing me, for giving me the courage to choose myself, and you." As snow fell gently outside their window, transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland of white, Wade and Katherine stood together in the warmth of their cabin, wrapped in each other's arms, their hearts full with the love they had found against all odds and the future they were creating together, day by day, choice by choice. A cowboy and his once reluctant bride, their love story indeed the talk of not one town but two, Cottonwood Springs, where it had begun, and Boulder City, where it would continue to unfold in ways neither of them could yet imagine. But of this they were certain: whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, equal partners in the grand adventure of building a life filled with purpose, passion, and above all, love.